So priming miniatures doesn't have to just be straight black and white. We can look at a few different other techniques that will help set you up and establish a good base foundation to start applying colour to your model. Today I want to experiment with a few different techniques to see exactly what outcome that plays on the final paint job. And we're going to look today at speed paints, i.e. contrast paints, and we're also going to look at some acrylic Duncan Rhodes tooth and coats. So come and join me as we delve into the world of priming and exactly how that can set you up for your paint job. I've had some burning questions in my mind around how much that initial priming style affects the overall outcome of the model. I've got 4 different priming techniques to try with the speed paints and 2 different priming techniques to try with acrylic paints. But today I want to look at a reverse Zenithal, so I'm going to be undershading this with the airbrush onto a matte white, and I'm going to use a red colour here just for a bit of difference. And then I'll be using a matte black prime job. And I've seen some really expert paint jobs done with matte black prime. Any of my other painting videos, more than likely I've used a Zenithal prime on that. So if you want to see how that looks with the acrylic paints, check out some of my other painting videos. The speed paints, I'm going to look at 4 different types of priming: a matte white all over, a Zenithal coat, a reverse Zenithal coat using the same red, and then a Slapchop style effect, so matte black with a white dry brushed on top. I know with speed paints, contrast paints, which are slightly translucent, this is going to play a big part in the overall look of the finished model. Not so much with the opaque acrylic paints as we're painting over things, but this does help establish, before you start painting, the type of highlights and some of the defined areas of the model you want to highlight before you even start putting paint on it. So join me as I have a look at these 6 models primed, then we'll slap some paint on it, and then we'll spend a bit of time looking at the final product. First off, the speed paints, I am starting with a matte white finish. This is sort of what's recommended with the speed paints. It should bring that vibrancy of the speed paints through, and then they will pull themselves into all the recesses, and that will create our shading. With this prime job, I'm expecting vibrant colours. We should see the vibrancy showing through from the white, and we should have some shadows, but I wouldn't expect that to be a very dark shadow because it's just the contrast paint doing the shadow work. Next, I'm looking at an undershaded white. So again, we're putting some red through the airbrush from underneath. This should bring some darkness to the shadows, but I'm expecting quite a vibrant paint job here. The speed paint should show through with the white, so we should get that vibrancy from the colour, and I'm expecting some additional shading because of airbrush work we've done, and we should still get that shading with the pooling and recessing of the speed paints. Next is our standard Zenithal prime, so matte black with white ink sprayed from the top. This simulates the light coming down. So we've still got some white ink to help bring some vibrancy through from those colours, from the speed paints, but I'm expecting this to be overall darker paint job. We should get that nice shading underneath everything, even if the speed paint does pull away because we've got the black. So I'm expecting some really deep, nice contrasty shadows. And lastly, we're looking at a Slapchop style. So this is a matte black, and I have dry brushed quite heavily at white on top. Here I've used quite a bit of white, so I'm expecting that vibrancy still. The shading, I would say, should be similar to the Zenithal, maybe a little bit lighter because the brush is reaching into those recesses a little bit as I dry brush over everything with my circular motions. So I would expect this to be the second darkest model overall. With the opaque paints, first I'm starting with, again, an undershaded white with that red underneath. Because I'm painting opaque paints on top of this, I'm expecting to have to repaint some of this red. Where I haven't undershaded, it's still white, so I am expecting this to not be desaturated model. It should be still quite vibrant, but I am going to use the same colour scheme as the black model that we're going to look at next, so we can definitely compare the colours. The very shaded colour though with this will be a red tone, whereas with the black I'll be using a deeper shade of whatever colour I'm actually painting. So let's go look at that black one. The black model here is definitely what I see quite a few professionals using. I'm expecting this to be quite desaturated, but still vibrant. Again, that vibrancy will really depend on how many layers and highlights we put into it. This does give you a bit of a chance to use your brush to really define everything. So I've got the models painted here. You can see I have left a couple of bits unpainted just so we can keep track of the models and still have a slight visual reference back to what that original prime work looked like. So we have our white speed paint, our reverse Zenithal speed paint, our typical Zenithal speed paint, our Slapchop speed paint, our black acrylic, and our reverse Zenithal acrylic job. So now I've got these painted. Let's look at these in a little bit more detail and a little bit closer, and then we'll do some head-to-head comparisons. So first, our speed painted matte white finish came up very vibrant. This was very easy to paint with one coat. The vibrancy showed through really easy. You will notice one thing with the speed paints and with the white underneath, any part where I slightly missed putting some speed paint on, where I was being careful, really shows up. One way to mitigate that would be to put a wash over, but that sort of defies the purpose of the speed paints. So you may find yourself at the very end of the job just touching up little parts of the model with the speed paint where the speed paint hasn't settled. Now when we look at the reverse Zenithal with the speed paint, again, this was pretty easy to paint. Again, still pretty vibrant, but definitely not as vibrant as the matte white. We can see those shadows coming through, and we see slightly desaturated where that reverse Zenithal is showing through the speed paints. So third, our typical Zenithal coat. The big difference here is I still went quite heavy with the white on top, so we still have some vibrancy showing through. Definitely a lot more desaturated, shaded. The shading works really well, and obviously where it should underneath everything. That's one thing you might find with the speed paints, is because it's gravity affected, your pooling is going to be at the bottom of places. So if it happens to be on the top of something that is shaded from over the top, you might not get the same shading. Zenithal, definitely anything underneath the light source is shaded darker. And then our Slapchop, very similar to the Zenithal. We do have those dark recesses, regardless of the pooling from the speed paint. Speed paint has still done its job and darkened in the recesses, but anywhere it has run off, it's still quite nice and dark. Still pretty good finish. You can see why people use Slapchop with speed paints. So I think I had the most fun painting the solid black primed miniature rather than the reverse Zenithal. There's parts you don't have to paint, and by not painting it and leaving some of the black in there, it's almost like going through and doing some black detailing later to separate the parts. All you have to do is not paint it, and you've got some black line separation between everything. And if you happen to not want to paint some of the details, which is one of the problems with such detailed miniatures, sometimes there's things in there you just can't be bothered painting, by leaving it black, you just don't see it. Compared to my reverse Zenithal, again, I still had to paint the red shading underneath it, and I just found, it was the same amount of layering as I've done on my black one. It still looks good, there's nothing wrong with it. The comparison detail on his satchel stands out a lot more on the white and basically blends into nothing with the black. So as far as a tabletop painting job goes, I think the black, even if you don't get all the way through painting it, you could still get away with that looking quite good on the table, and the details that I haven't painted in here just don't stand out, whereas this one, anything unpainted stands out a mile away. You really need to get that completely painted before you put it on the table. and I just get an overall better vibe from the black. We'll do a head-to-head comparison, let you decide on what you think is best. And the speed paints, let's get some head-to-head comparisons going. I'll compare them all, and that way you can make your own decisions on what you see and what you think looks good. Bearing in mind with the reverse Zenithal, the Zenithal standard typical one, and our dry brushing. With the speed paints, it's going to depend on how heavy you go. How heavy do you dry brush on the white? Do you go deep into the recesses, or just very much on the raised details to quite a white standard to make that speed paint pop? Again, with the Zenithal, do you go with quite a light shade, or do you go a little bit heavier just to bring that white through because you know you're putting the speed paint on it? And one of the main takeaways here, I think, is to really decide on your priming technique when you're deciding on what type of paint job you're going to do. If you're going to do a speed paint job, that will definitely affect the way you prime the model compared to an acrylic paint job. It's definitely made me think about maybe leaving some of my stuff black, not going straight to a Zenithal. So look, if you found this experimentation helpful, if it helped cleared up some ideas around priming that maybe you haven't had a chance to experiment with, may have even made you consider getting an airbrush so you can really get into the Zenithal and the reverse undershading from underneath. If any of this has helped you out, maybe think about hitting the like button. And if you want to see more content like this, stuff around 3D printing, painting, models, maybe hit the subscribe button. The next step from here, if you're really getting into it, is to look at combining speed paints and acrylic paints to make a really fantastic, easy, quick paint job. If you want to see a video on that, check out this video here where I speed paint and acrylic paint a puppeteer's hand. And from here, I'll see you in the next video.